Let's begin with that topic of Greenland. What exactly happened in that room? I've known you a long time. Nobody doubts your powers of persuasion. But we all saw Donald Trump on the podium saying that he wanted that big, beautiful block of ice. Goes into a room with you and he says he has a framework for a deal. What did you do?
President Trump has been clear from when he was in office, Trump 45, also when he came back into office, Trump 47, that when it comes to the protection of the Arctic, with a priority on Greenland, we have to spend more energy, more time, more focus on this, because we know the sea lanes are opening up. The Chinese and the Russians are more and more active. So what we discussed last night, how in a practical sense we can get this done, and we agreed on these two tracks. One is the 7 countries in the High North, including the United States, working together to protect against any adversary. So that will be something where NATO is heavily involved. And then when it comes to Greenland specifically, continuing the discussions they started last week. The Danish delegation, Secretary Rubio, Vice President Vance in Washington, to continue that discussion. Also to make sure that when it comes to Greenland specifically, their economy, their military situation, Russia and China will never get access.
And the Danes and sovereignty, is that all assured?
We didn't discuss at all about that issue. So we discussed how can we protect Greenland, how can we protect the wider Arctic region. And again, I think President Trump was the one who reinvigorated NATO at the summit in The Hague with the famous 5%. I think we can be thankful for the fact that he again has been able to take leadership on this issue. How can we collectively protect the Arctic?
The latest rumours out there that it will involve sort of bigger bases, longer leases, but not actually changing sovereignty, and the idea of far more American troops. Is that the sort of basis of it?
We didn't go into those details at all. We know that the Danes are completely open to having more American presence in Greenland, and Greenland is open to that. And I think it is good that these discussions take place with the 3 of them, because at the end I cannot negotiate on behalf of anyone. I was listening to a lot of people. I think there is a landing ground here, but in the end, of course, now we have to make it happen.
Do you think this is the week when Europe finally discovered its backbone?
I think this is the week where collectively, we decided to focus on this important topic under President Trump's leadership. And second, the week where we continue to focus on Ukraine, because I think that's still the main issue at the table, to make sure that Ukraine sustains in the fight.
In Trump's speech, there seemed to be a degree of linkage between the two. We're backing you in Ukraine, I want Greenland. Do you think that's a healthy...
Yeah, I never comment on speeches of leaders. What I do is look at the practical...
Very lucky in this case.
But I look at the practical stuff. And President Trump has been clear from day one in office, as he was already in his previous presidential term. And I spoke with him then when I was Prime Minister of the Netherlands. We had many meetings. And I know he is really worried about this thing of the Russians and China. And he's right there, getting more access to the Arctic. So I think next to saving NATO, he is now clearly taking the lead on making sure the Arctic stays safe.
And on Ukraine, what is your assessment of what's happening on the front there? Because there seem to be 2 very clear things. One European leader saying, look, Ukraine is really in trouble. Others saying, look, Ukraine is doing a bit better on the battlefield.
I think what you see is that the front line is not moving in the right direction. It is moving westwards, not eastwards. At the same time, it is extremely slow. The Russians are making very incremental gains, so not huge, very small gains, against huge losses. They are now losing 1,000 people a day in December, so 30,000 over the months. I'm not talking about seriously wounded, really dead. It's terrible, the losses they are experiencing at the moment. And of course also on the Ukrainian side we see losses, but not to that extent. And so the Ukrainians are extremely courageous in defending the front line, but again it is slowly not moving in the right direction. And I think the peace process is really crucial here under leadership of President Trump again, but also with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Marco Rubio. And I think the security guarantees are now in a good place, almost nailed. We are close to a deal, I think, on reconstruction, and now this sensitive issue of territory also has to be solved.
Just one thing on that front line, agreed, Ukraine is doing quite well, but back behind that front line, you've got people, it's freezing, There seems to be problems with the politics in Ukraine. Is that where the weakness of Ukraine is at the moment?
I would not say the weakness, but it shows you the Russian brutality and that they are willing to attack innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure, that people are now in conditions of minus 20 degrees are living without heating, without water in Kiev and Kharkiv and other cities, in smaller villages. And that means that I ask my European colleagues, please keep your eyes on this ball. The Americans are willing to provide Ukraine with the interceptors, the military gear they need, paid for by the Europeans and the Canadians. We have to keep that flow going. We have to make sure that we dig deep into our own European stockpiles when it comes to interceptors, to make sure that this fantastically courageous Ukrainian military can sustain in that fight.
Do you think in the peace talks that issue of where the front line is has been sort of solved? Putin wanted all the Donbass. Many people point out that the Ukrainian line, where it is at the moment, is actually protecting the road to Kiev. So militarily, you'd not want to give it away. Do you think that is now set in stone, and Trump has come round to seeing that?
Ultimately, it is up to Ukraine, of course, to decide what type of agreement they can do on territory. That's up to Ukraine. Yeah. But what I know is that for President Zelenskiy to really fully get his mind around that issue, he needs to know that we have security guarantees in place which will prevent the Russians from ever attacking again. The good news is that under French and UK leadership, this coalition of the willing came together. Then the American president said, I will help with backstop, with other unique US capabilities to make sure, building on the Ukrainian armed forces, 800,000 in size potentially, going forward. And that provides a package of security guarantees where the Ukrainian people know now and in the future, Putin will know, if I try again, the reaction will be devastating.
Is it one of the problems, again, another European leader, and you hear this repeatedly from your erstwhile peers, is that Trump always comes back to the same thing, that Zelensky is the blockage, not Putin?
I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair, because he has always, also in many interviews, been very critical about Putin. I think he wants this done. He wants to end the meat grinder, and I'm with him on this. And he is the one who was breaking the deadlock with Putin in February, the first phone call. Only he could do this. He is the leader of the free world. He is the only man who was able to do that, to break the deadlock. And now the Europeans are helping. We are doing this together. Europeans stepping up again. We did it at the NATO summit with the spending. Now when it comes to Ukraine. But I think in the end, Zelensky absolutely wants to do a deal. The question now is, of course, to Putin. Is he willing to do a deal? And that's being tested at the moment.
When you step back from this week, I know you're right in the hurly-burly at the moment, going here, there, trying to keep people together. And as I said, you've got a lot of credit for what happened in that room. But you look at
credit should be with President Trump, and I really mean this, because it was his vision to protect the Arctic, and I think yesterday we found a path forward to collectively do that.
But on NATO, as Mark Carney said yesterday, there is a rupture at the moment. You are head of NATO, that is the North Atlantic Treaty. I've heard more fury from European leaders this week than I think I have ever before in terms of America.
I would say to my European colleagues,
do you worry about the long-term consequences of that?
No, and I would say to my European colleagues, focus on implementing the agreements in The Hague. Build your defense industries, get the spending done, get your men and women in uniform. The numbers of those men and women in uniform, getting them ramped up is crucial. I mean, Germany is leading the way here, spending 90 billion more in 2029 than they did in 2021. So that's fantastic. Opening factories all over the place, but still overall as NATO, including the US, our defense industrial base is still too small, and we need to ramp that up. So I think to my European colleagues, focus on really on the ball, and the ball is Ukraine. The ball is the implementation of the The Hague Summit conclusions, and then when you have time after dinner, we can still gossip and talk, but it is about implementing the real decisions.
On that issue, that thing of Ukraine is still, in your mind, the big test. That is the bigger issue rather than Greenland and everything that is happening now.
Yeah, in the end, of course, that's overriding. And when you look at Greenland and the Arctic, it's about Russia and China. When you look at about Ukraine, it is also about Russia. And how do we protect ourselves against Russia? And Ukraine, of course, it's crucial that they sustain in that fight and that we get Ukraine to a sustainable outcome. And this is exactly what President Trump and his team, but also many Europeans supporting him in this, are working towards.